This is Sony's brand new flagship camera, the A1 Mark II, and this camera costs $6,500, which is really expensive. We know here at Think Media that's definitely typically out of the budget price range that we would recommend somebody spend on their first camera if you're a YouTube creator, or even if you're a professional video creator. I mean, $6,500 is a ton, but we did want to get this camera in hand, so Sony sent it to us for a couple weeks so we could do some testing, because we wanted to see how their top-of-the-line flagship camera stacks up against some of even their lower ticket offerings. Something like an entry-level hybrid camera from them would be like the Sony A7 IV. So today we have some comparison testing that we did between the A7 IV and the A1 Mark II, so you can just get a sense of if you spent like $2,000 on an A7 IV versus $6,500, what that could get you, and also explain how the release of the A1 Mark II is going to affect the cameras that come after this camera's release, like an A7 V potentially, or an A7S IV, or an FX3 Mark II, these cameras that we know and love, and how the A1 Mark II is going to affect those camera releases. A little side note, I actually have been an owner of the original Sony A1 for the past 3 years. My wife and I are wedding photographers and filmmakers, so we tend to shoot a lot of weddings every year, and the A1 has been a go-to camera for us for many years. So I was excited to get the A1 Mark II in hand to see how improved this camera is over the first version. Let's first take a look at some of the video samples from the A1 Mark II. The video in this camera is absolutely beautiful, and as we've seen with a lot of Sony's cameras lately, the video quality in these Sony cameras looks great, especially now that they're all leveraging 10-bit color science. So all that means is you're just going to get better color out of all of these newer Sony cameras, and the A1 is going to give you some of the best results that you'll see out of a Sony camera. This camera can also shoot in 8K video up to 30 frames per second, and I know that's pretty overkill for most people. You don't need to be shooting in 8K resolution, and most of us would be shooting in a 4K resolution format, maybe around 24 or 30 frames per second, or maybe 60 if you need slow motion, but 8K resolution is wild. It does produce a great image in 8K, I just typically don't use the 8K format. I did do some side-by-side video samples of the A7 IV versus the A1 Mark II, and I was so surprised at how well the A7 IV held up versus the A1 Mark II, and that camera is like 3 times more expensive than the A7 IV, and it's several years newer as well. And that's just something that I noticed even while I was shooting wedding films, that anytime I would use like my FX3 or my A1, or the A7 IV, or even some of these lower end Sony cameras like the ZV-E10, a lot of these Sony cameras interchange really well, and a lot of times in my wedding films I might have to grab a clip of the A7 IV and the FX3 and an A1, stitch them all together, and they pair really seamlessly. Like honestly, there's not a huge disparity in image quality between their $2,000 camera or a $6,500 camera. Now that's not to diminish the image quality of the A1 Mark II. This thing looks beautiful right now that I'm filming on. All that really goes to show you is just how great some of their more affordable cameras are at producing really high quality video results. Honestly, looking at some of these side-by-side comparisons, I bet if I removed the labels on which camera was which, it would be pretty hard to tell. You might be able to zoom in to like 500% and really start pixel peeping to figure it out, but I really thought the A7 IV performed pretty well, all things considered. In terms of autofocus performance with the A1 Mark II, this thing is absolutely amazing. I can move all around and it's never going to miss focus. It just locks onto your eye so well. I mean, the autofocus is probably the best Sony has ever created, and that's not to say like their other cameras are poor performing at autofocus, and in fact, the A7 IV and a lot of the cameras that Sony has produced lately have outstanding autofocus. This just technically is probably the best, even though all the other ones are still really good. Now the A1 Mark II does feature the updated Bion's XR processor, and all that really means is this camera is going to be really fast at processing video and photo files, but also your experience for like navigating the menu system and reliability of the camera is just improved with this updated processor in the Mark II. And what this processor also is going to do is give us a little bit better noise performance, about 1 stop better noise performance over the original Sony A1. But honestly, nowadays, whether you're buying a full frame Sony camera or even some of their crop sensor APS-C cameras, you can shoot at high ISOs like 2, 3, 4,000 ISO pretty easily and still retain really good image results. But if you really do want the best resolution with a 50 megapixel sensor and really good dynamic range and ISO performance, the A1 Mark II really is the best camera that Sony makes right now. Now, in terms of taking photos with this camera, I mean, what can I say? This thing is perfect. That 50 megapixel sensor is outrageous. It lets you crop in your images and reframe without really losing any detail at all. That actually is still the same sensor as the original Sony A1, and I've loved using my A1 over the last few years, shooting a lot of professional photos for different kinds of clients. The A1 Mark II gives me very similar photo results. It just somehow does it a tiny bit better, which I didn't even really know was possible. This is also the first Sony camera to add pre-capture as a feature when you're taking photos. What this allows you to do is take a photo, but the camera's also capturing images before you actually press the shutter button, so you don't miss the most important moments. So this is great if you're taking action style photos or you're shooting wildlife, animal photography, something like that. And you can set the camera to pre-capture up to 1 second prior to you hitting the shutter release. So this is just a really cool feature that's unique to the A1 Mark II right now. They also made several design improvements with the A1 Mark II, including this just really nice grip and sort of angled shutter release area. I mean, this thing just feels so good in the hand. I can't even really explain how it feels. You just sort of need to feel one and compare it to some of Sony's older mirrorless cameras to just see how good it feels in the hand. It's actually the exact same body design as the A9 Mark III. So if you've ever used that camera before, it'll be a familiar experience with shooting with the A1 Mark II. They also adjust some of the dials and added some different custom and function buttons throughout the camera as well. It's really not that much of a different layout from the original A1, but there are some subtle differences. And you of course also get the wonderful 4-axis tilt screen. This thing is an outstanding screen design. It's kind of like a transformer. You can like flip this thing in any direction. And we first saw this screen introduced with the Sony A7R V. And when that was released with that camera, everybody was freaking out, rightfully so, because that is such a great screen design. And I hope they implement this screen in future camera releases here soon to come. So I hope one of the things that you can see about the A1 Mark II is that it's sort of a combination of all of Sony's best features from all of the cameras that they've created, right? It's got like the screen from the A7R V, and then the grip and body design of the A9 Mark III. And then it's added even like that dynamic active stabilization feature that's in the ZV-E1, I believe, the full frame ZV-E1, which is a crazy stabilization mode that basically makes it look like your camera is on a gimbal, even though it's not. I mean, this stabilization is wild. And then it has your updated processors or your AI autofocus tracking capabilities. And this camera just really combines a lot of the best features of other Sony cameras and puts it into the A1 Mark II with a few distinct features. And I think that's one of the reasons why this camera has kind of gotten a little bit of flack or not as much hype as it should, because we've seen a lot of these features before, but we haven't all seen all of the features in one camera. And that's what the A1 Mark II is. And it's amazing, but it's just so expensive at $6,500. Not many people can afford that price point for all of those great features. So who is the Sony A1 Mark II for? I'd say it really is for professional video and photo creators who need the best of the best sensor and resolution and autofocus performance and just need their camera to be fully spec'd out. The A1 Mark II is that camera for you. But truly, for 99% of creators, going for something like the A7 IV or the A7C II, or even an APS-C camera like the ZV-E10 Mark II for $999, for $1,000, that camera has a lot of great features similar to the A1 Mark II, but it cost a sixth of the price. So I don't want you to be discouraged if you can't afford the best of the best Sony cameras. Sony is really great at trickling down some of their top features to their lower end cameras over time. So just wait like 12 to 18 months to see what happens with potentially a Sony A7 V or an A7S IV or an FX3 Mark II. You never know what they're going to do with some of these dedicated video cameras, and maybe we'll see an updated sensor with 8K resolution or a more entry-level photo camera that does feature this pre-capture feature if you're a wildlife or sports photographer. But for now, I have no plans to upgrade my original Sony A1 to the A1 Mark II because the A1 has served me well for multiple years, and I'm going to keep using it for all of my professional photo and video work. But who knows, maybe you're a creator who wants the best of the best Sony camera, and right now the A1 Mark II would be that camera. And if you're on more of a budget and you want to see some of our favorite beginner Sony Alpha cameras, you can click or tap the screen right here to check out that video, and we'll see you in the next one.